Yeah. So we're going to follow this. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Colette Tevet. I'm the National Indigent Defense Training Director for NACDL, and I work with Diane Price, who's also here today, who's our training manager. Diane and I work on indigent defense issues throughout the country, working with public defender agencies, private assigned counsel agencies to address some of the issues that we are facing in the indigent defense community. Pretrial reform issues, workload studies, targeted training. NACDL is working to help ensure that the Sixth Amendment right to counsel is being met throughout this country. We're also very excited that we have now introduced a scholarship program that is available if you go onto our website, nacdl.org/indigent defense. And you could fill out the application process, which will allow public defenders and private assigned counsel members to attend or apply for attending national CLE programs. We are also happy to announce that we give special rates to public defenders. So I'm very hopeful that for some of you folks that are out there watching today, that you would consider becoming an NACDL member. We have wonderful live CLEs, the monthly champion articles. We have resources, reports, and we're very welcoming to the indigent defense community. I'm very thrilled and honored today to present Raj Jayadev and Jean Malasane from Silicon Valley Debug. Raj and Jean are going throughout the country and they're doing amazing work for indigent defense providers. Raj is a coordinator of both SVBug Debug and coordinates the ACJ project, which is an organizing model for families and communities to impact local court systems. Jean Malasane is a photographer, writer, editor with Silicon Valley Debug. They have been going throughout the country working in jurisdictions such as San Jose, Alabama Public Defender's Office, Philadelphia, St. Louis, and Ferguson. They just published an amazing photo and reflection piece for the Huffington Post, which is available online as well as on their website. And they came just, I think, this week from South by Southwest in Austin to really tell our communities what's going on. We are at a historic moment in this country. Ferguson, New York, Ohio. We have seen mass incarceration, and the folks that are profoundly impacted by mass incarceration are our communities of color. Oftentimes on misdemeanor offenses where people plead guilty and are facing jail and prison, oftentimes for small and minor infractions. And as Raj will tell you, it's not the Supreme Court declarations, it's not the federal intervention that makes the impact in this country, it's our communities. It's the gravity of their collective power, the political physics of ground-up community action. Raj and Jean are going to walk us through what they call participatory defense, and then they'll share with us social video biographies. And Jean will walk through that process and show the impact of telling our clients' stories. When we go into court, we're not simply standing there and telling a story about who our client is. We need to communicate who they are and how that what's at stake every single time that they're pleading guilty to an offense. I'm honored to have Raj Jayadev.
Hi everyone, thank you Colette, Diane, NACDL. It's an honor to be here and to join you online as well. And just to give you a bit of foreshadowing of what we're going to take you through in the next couple hours, give or take, is telling the story of participatory defense and how it developed. We're going to talk about some tangible activities that client communities themselves are doing to change the outcome of cases and also change the atmosphere of the relationship between defender offices and the community that is impacted by mass incarceration. And we're also going to talk about what we see kind of popping up in different communities that we've seen as instincts on the ground in different parts of the nation that we think could be developed into an effective and sustainable practice of participatory defense to change forever the trajectory of criminal justice in this country. After we go through that sort of base setting side of the presentation, we're going to get into a very specific tactic or tool of participatory defense, which is called social biography videos. We're going to show you a couple and also show you how to make them for cases in your hometowns. So I'm going to be using the Prezi, and some of you may have this already, and if you don't worry about it. We're really just going to be using it sort of as an outline as a way to carry us along, and they'll also be able to download, or you'll have the links available to you. So yeah, and so again, let me say this in the beginning. If you have questions, please do email Diane. I believe her email address has already been sent to you. dprice@nacdl.org. And we'll be taking questions periodically through the presentation. So just to, if you are looking at the Prezi, you're going to see an image that we drafted in Birmingham, Alabama, where we're telling the story of how a community organization who really had no background or connection to doing criminal justice reform work all of a sudden became a participant of the court process as what we thought was the most critical and urgent way of impacting the communities that were being really under the shoe or under the heel of the court system. And the reason why I bring up our background is really to stress the point that the ingredients of participatory defense exist in your own hometown. You don't need our organization specifically to do it, but we think the infrastructure of community organizing is inherent to the communities that the clients that are represented by public defenders are already representing. So we were a community organization in San Jose, California that worked with young people, worked with families, and we worked on local social justice issues. And we weren't necessarily doing things with courts. We weren't even doing things explicitly with mass incarceration. But as any trusted community touchstone will tell you, when issues impact the people that walk through your doors, you have to find a way to address those needs. And so about 8 years ago, we started getting involved in police accountability work, not by design, but really by the necessity of what the people we cared about were going through. And so we had a couple high-profile officer-involved shootings that we felt urged to respond to. But then also we saw sort of a larger issue of police arresting practice in downtown San Jose. Namely, the police department were issuing out drunken public arrests indiscriminately, or I should say discriminately, at a high clip. And what we found was people were being given a drunken public, a 647F, that one, weren't even necessarily drunk. And what we found anecdotally from our communities, where people felt they were being targeted because they weren't the type of element that our city wanted downtown. And the threshold for probable cause was so low, police officers were essentially just generating police reports that said slurred speech and blurry vision. And then people would be dinged with this arrest. What was happening with them is that they would then enter the court system, go to a misdemeanor arraignment court, and have no representation, and then they'd be negotiating their plea directly with the judge. This was common practice. But when we did the public information requests, and when the media picked up on what we were calling out anecdotally, and there was an examination laid out that showed that actually the arresting practice in San Jose not only was high, it was 4 times the rate of any other city comparable to its size in California. And although we expected some racial disproportionality, it was even more so than other cities. So for example, Latinos in San Jose in the general population represent roughly 30%. But the arrest rate for this charge was near 80. Now what that meant was we reacted and responded the way any other community organization would when faced with those type of numbers and that type of sort of political call to act. And we had the same playbook that any other organization has. We took to the streets, and we knew how to do the rallies, and we knew how to do the marches, we knew how to do the press conferences. But what we didn't know was what to do when a case hit the court process. Meanwhile, and you'll see on the image, there's people holding picket signs and marching. This is the common response from community organizations that have issues with criminal justice, but they're only dealing with the point of entry of the justice system, which is interaction with police. And so when more people started calling our organization because they had a range of issues with the criminal justice system, and we were sort of the only game in town, the only organization they could call that they thought they could get some help from. And so people would call and say, hey, I was wrongfully arrested, or I'm facing more charges than I deserve, or I was a victim of use of force. We'd say, come on down to our center and let's talk it through. And the common instinct of a lot of community organizers is how to get to the offensive as quickly as you can. And for us in that particular context, that meant how do you cause a campaign that could say, hold that officer accountable, or get their officer removed, or make some policy change with the entire department. But what we found when people and their families would come to our meetings and they would talk about the situation, and it was a range of issues, there was a common denominator, which is they were all facing criminal charges, and we all had no idea what to do about that side to get to the offensive campaigns. And it was around that time that we started looking up, sort of getting out beyond just what our organization was thinking about. And if you look at the image, what you're going to see is sort of 2 parallel tracks. So while there were people that we cared about that were part of the fabric of our community, they were then going to the court, but they were going to the court process alone. What that meant was, and this was a keen insight for us and one that we're trying to share nationally, is that our communities know the power of collective action and community organizing, and how it could bend institutions that otherwise seem all too powerful. But we were relinquishing power at the most critical stage of the life history of the case. When it hit the courtroom, we would essentially reactively back off. And the reason why I bring that up is because in some regard we were cutting ourselves at the knees if we really wanted to have impact. And the reason why it was significant was we think there was a common experience, even among those who are critical of the court system, that if you're not a lawyer and you're not a judge, you don't have a place in that arena. And we had a retired public defender, Aaron James, a dear friend and co-founder of this work, who said you should use that community power and flex it in the court system. And that was a light bulb going off for us. And so what we did was essentially find a way to penetrate the criminal court system and use that same community organizing IQ that we've used in every other arena of public life. How to fix schools, how to fix healthcare, how to fix corrupt city council offices, and employ that in a process or an institution of the court system that had been insulated from community organizing pressure up until that time. And meanwhile, if you look at the image, what that meant was there was a parallel road where there was a public defender's office that our community knew very little about. And they were the people that were tasked with advocating with for our loved ones in this labyrinth of a criminal court system. But they were going into that battle without any sort of backup. What we started doing, practically speaking, is we started having meetings. And these meetings were half support group meetings and half strategy sessions. So if you look in the image, really what it is a bunch of people sitting around a table. And what they're doing, they're there either because they themselves are facing the court system, they have a case, or their loved one is detained and they want to do something about it. And so who was at the meetings were mothers, were daughters, were husbands, fathers, sometimes church pastors whose congregant had been arrested. And what they wanted was really sort of license or an invitation to act. What that meant was people were yearning to get involved in some way, but there's two things that were getting in their way. One, they didn't know they had a right to participate in this process to some degree. But then secondly, even if they felt they had license to engage, they didn't know exactly what to do. And we figured if we could figure out the tools and the particular mechanisms that they could engage in, it could have an impact. So what they started doing is meeting once a week, and we would ask two core questions. What is the status of the case? And then sort of bring us up to speed. And then secondly, what is our to-do list? What is our sort of game plan for this coming week? And the reason why it was important was, as you all know, that going through the adjudication process is far and beyond the most isolated experience someone could face in this country. It is so lonely, it is debilitating, and destroys families, relationships, and lives. Not only for the person that's detained, but for the people who care about them, and oftentimes even for the lawyer. If we could challenge and break that sense of isolation through a communal approach, we could have a larger impact. So what the family started doing is meeting and horizontally learning from one another. So one family who had faced a similar case would then inform the other family, here's what I did, and here are things you could do. And we started seeing and distilling patterns of specific activities that could be done. I'm going to go down and drill down to some of those activities in a little bit, but just to give you a sense, families would do things like reviewing police reports and finding out discrepancies that they could share from their observations with the attorney. They would get and collect a social biography background on the person facing charges that could be used by the attorney and put into effective tools like social biography packets or even videos. They would get important paperwork that was maybe difficult for the attorney or the investigator to get and make it present and available so the legal team could have access. The other thing they would do was also change the community's perspective on how to communicate with the defense team. So oftentimes, as you all know, you need witnesses that could help corroborate or help strengthen and bolster the theory of defense of the attorney. Now, what happens when investigators go to a community and try to talk to a witness on behalf of their client. A client that that witness wants to support and cares about and would help if they knew. Instinctively, a lot of people are hesitant because they don't know the investigator is working on behalf of the person they care about. Or there's this general feeling that if I get involved, they're an extension of the system and I should just keep my mouth shut or I shouldn't come forward. But if you have the trust of the community that could act really as a connector to the defense team, then we can make sure witnesses come forward, information doesn't get lost, things get written down in time to even mount a defense. So these were the type of activities practically people were doing on a case-by-case basis. And what we saw was transformation for the people involved. In a practical matter, it led to acquittals, led to dismissals, it led to sentences being reduced, felonies reduced to misdemeanors, because the attorney had at their disposal a larger network of resources that they could tap into, that they weren't alone, that they had essentially a larger defense team. And what we did was start sharing the model with other organizations. So if you look on the image, there is the Public Defender's Office, but also a church that we now have weekly meetings at, a youth organization in a neighboring city that we also have meetings at. The idea is to end the isolation not only for the person facing charges, but the entire team that's advocating for them, where the public defender really is central to that message. And so now the public defender has a network that they could connect to on behalf of their clients. So what we found out, though, was there was a larger systemic issue about how public defender offices were understood that needed to be addressed. And it's a common experience and one I don't really need to repeat too much because it'll feel very familiar. When people would come to our meetings, and one of the first questions we'd ask was, well, who is your attorney? They would say, oh, I don't have an attorney, I have a public defender. And it's part of, and we'll get into this later, because there is a false narrative of what and who public defenders are and their relationship to the community. And so you'll see on the image, there was a looming cloud around this work. And it was a lack of trust in defender offices and the people that are representing our communities. But when people would come to our meetings and they would learn not from, say, someone trying to do PR for the defender office, but from other families, other mothers, other people that were former clients that would say, you know, the best way that you could have the best outcome for your loved one is to make sure that you partner, collaborate, and team with the public defender. And the response, the retort, is what people are hearing anecdotally in the streets, which is, oh, just get this one private defender. I'm sorry, not defender, private attorney. And they know very little about them. But we think the sweet spot for larger change is really in the synergy between communities and public defenders, because they're representing 9 out of 10 people that are facing charges. And after people started having experiences with the defender office, this is over 8 years, we are able to change the atmosphere in our community of how public defenders were understood. So when we started 8 years ago, and they would say, well, I don't feel comfortable or confident with a public defender, what happened internally is after they had the experience, after they saw how committed public defenders are, after they see how savvy they are in the courtroom, how battle-tested they are with trial experience, now they would be telling other people at the meeting who are just starting that journey, you should go with the public defender's office because you can be confident that they'll be the best advocate for you to get the best results. Now, this is what we're finding in our little corner of San Jose. But what we knew was, for us to have larger impact, we needed to change the narrative in totality in our community. That can only be just for the people who walk through our doors at this church once a week, or at our community center at the youth organization. And we have a sort of saying at Debug. And when people come in to a meeting, and as you know, it's arguably the darkest time in their lives, the loneliest, most fearsome time of their lives. And they're lost, they're left without navigation, and they don't know how possibly things could work out well for them or the people they care about. And we say, well, if you come here, the system, if you just let things go as they are, is going to give your loved one time served. And what that means is the criminal justice system is going to send your loved one to prison or jail, have some sort of consequence that is going to be a major impact on your life. But if you participate, if you engage, if you partner with the attorney, you could turn time served into time saved. And what that means is your loved one home, with their kids, in school, in the community, maintaining a job, all the things that they should be doing. And while that works on our kind of meeting level, and it's a spiritual experience when people come to our meetings, we thought, well, what if we quantify the numbers as a way to show the non-believers that say, oh, the public defender system is broken, you know, if you don't have money, you don't get justice. What's a way we could tangibly show them some real results? And they heard our anecdotal stories of so-and-so beat a life case, or so-and-so got a felony reduced to a misdemeanor. And they say, okay, you got cute stories, but how do you show really a larger systemic change? And we quantified the numbers. And when we looked at the last 8 years, of all the cases of people that went through our process of participatory defense, and we looked at what they're facing versus what they got as a result of engaging and partnering with the attorney, we had over 1,800 years of time saved from incarceration. And that's an undeniable number. And when you think about each one of those years representing time that would otherwise be forever lost, and you think about what would happen if they were incarcerated, what would happen to the people in their lives, and what happens as a result of them being present, the change is profound. And it all happens through this engagement. And so we use these devices to change the larger narrative. We had a party where we invited the public defender's office and clients, where we celebrated 1,800 years. We started making documentary videos and art that showed a defender and a client as a way to pronounce and counter the narrative that you can't get justice if you don't pay for your representation. The other last thing I want to say before I move on to some specifics is the personal of these cases led to policy changes. And that was an important learning for us, in that what we found was when people were able to look under the hood of the criminal justice system, and I'm not talking about criminal justice experts, I'm not talking about people that are self-proclaimed activists, I'm talking about families that would have had no engagement with the court system had this tragedy not happened to them. I'm talking about mothers, talking about fathers, community leaders. And what they found was vulnerabilities or key areas that needed broader change in order to have a magnified impact. And these are places that the public defender's office already knew needed to be changed, but maybe didn't have the political heft to change it. And we found if we could partner the community with the public defender's office, we can make some of these systemic changes. So the two examples I sort of look to is, we didn't have public defender representation in our misdemeanor arraignment courts. And for that reason, we had thousands of people that were catching criminal records that otherwise shouldn't have if they had their constitutional protections respected. Now that language was gibberish to most of us, misdemeanor arraignment courts. But when we had people come through our meetings and we saw the collateral consequences, and we were able to visit other public defender offices in other regions and found, wait, our people have the same right to have representation. We talked to our public defender at the time. And she said, look, I've always wanted to have representation at courts, but I need buy-in from our elected officials, the people with the purse strings. And this is where the real advantage is of participatory defense and policymaking, is the elected officials, the people that are holding the purse strings, respond to larger civic engagements that aren't necessarily from only an isolated public defender's office. And so our families were able to draw in the larger civil rights community to then meet with our elected officials to echo the public defender's call to have an expanded budget, to have public defender offices present in misdemeanor arraignment court. That happened because of that collaboration, and today we now have public defenders in that courtroom, and thousands of people who otherwise would have had criminal records are free of that as a result of that connection. The other example I give is around our immigrant detainer policy, where in Santa Clara County, for a long time, and thankfully the rest of the country is caught up, we have the most progressive immigrant detainer policy in the nation. Now, that didn't happen solely through immigrant rights advocates. It didn't happen solely through the public defender's office. It happened by a collective approach where the public defender's office said that we need to make sure that our clients' rights are respected regardless of their immigration status, and we can't have ICE coming in and taking our clients. We need to create a protective barrier around our jails from ICE. But then secondly, we had community organizations like ourselves that had seen the criminal court side, because we had been in those courts, know the impact. And we said we need to help and partner with the public defender's office to create this level of protection. And it was through that collaboration that we're able to win a policy that was sort of unprecedented nationally. So I'm going to talk about some of these more specific mechanics of what exactly people do. And so when people ask, well, what happens at these meetings? I told you what happens when they come in. You know, and the first question they usually ask is, well, where's the lawyer? And we say, there's no lawyer here. This is a community support approach. And it's important for us because we are community organizers. And what that means is, it's the reason why we don't use the word client or legal clinic in our approach. Because legal clinic presumes that someone is the recipient of a service, which means that they are not necessarily the agents of change for that transformation. But at the meetings, people are learning and strategizing horizontally, and there's the collective intelligence of the room that informs the strategic next steps. What that means are people who have otherwise seen themselves as the victim of police profiling, the victim of the injustices of the criminal justice system, are seeing the power of their own capacity and agency to make change. And so when people come in, we ask for names on the board. They write the names of their loved one. We get an update, and we have a to-do list. And we rotate facilitators specifically for that point, so people don't sense that they're just getting a better service, but they're going to be asked to engage, asked to participate. And the specific ideas that they get, and maybe we could flash this screen for those of you that have it, turned out to be very tangible tools that were effective and useful for the public defender. So they would secure material like medical backgrounds or educational backgrounds of the public defender client. They would ensure witnesses communicate to defense attorneys. They would create mitigation packets, what we call social biography packets, and social biography packet videos. So this image to the left of the screen is one of those images. And what that was is oftentimes families get asked, oh, can you get me some character letters? But people don't necessarily know what to write in those letters. Or is there a specific message they themselves have the right authority to carry? What the employer says on behalf of a client is different from what the mother says for a client. And so if we could actually use the social biography packets or mitigation packets to echo the argument that the attorney is using for negotiations or to get a better resolution, then the impact is magnified. Something simple that has a profound effect is attending court. Not just the individual, but an entire network of community that has been built through this model so people don't feel alone, but also so prosecutors and judges know that the person that they're making a ruling on or trying to prosecute has support, and that they themselves, as actors of the court, are going to be watched, and their behavior is also going to be held to account. Another thing they did is, let's say their loved one is detained and in custody. They're hearing a lot of things on the inside, some of it good, some of it not so helpful. What they're often being sort of instructed is not to trust the court-appointed counsel or the public defender, because they've heard these anecdotes. Oh, I had a public defender and I was forced to plea and I was innocent. These are the type of stories that circulate in jails and prisons. And if a public defender says, oh no, trust me, there's really little gravity to that, right? What you need to build trust is have someone else that is respected vouch for you. Someone that you believe in can vouch for you because you're locked up and alone. And so if the family is coming to this meeting and they're building communication with the attorney, then when that loved one calls home, says, I have this public defender, I'm not sure if they're looking out for my best interest, mother can vouch for the attorney and say, look, I'm communicating with them, they're working very hard, they've done a lot of work, and you need to collaborate with them and have a team approach. Can't tell you how significant that was. And the other thing that happens is we could help make the communication between the legal team and the client or the family effective, purposeful, and efficient. And we all know that public defenders are overworked, stretched bare, and have at the least of their disposal time as a resource. So in our meetings, families are finding out ways they could laser beam in the key questions they have or key pieces of information they think is useful. So that way when they have the half-hour sit-down or whatever it is with the attorney in the office, it's not spinning their wheels. But we could make sure that it's an effective time, not just for the family, but for the attorney. So this is an image of the party, for those of you that could see the screen. That's Ramon holding the sign. We actually had a total of 1,862 years of time saved. And Ramon was falsely arrested of a gang-related murder. Totally innocent. Gene, can I get a time check? And he wasn't even at the scene. It was sloppy police work. He had done 6 months, but the family got engaged. That's his family there. Partnered with the attorney and actually gave them critical information and background on Ramon that was used to get Ramon's freedom. And he not only got his freedom, he got a factual finding of innocence, which hadn't been seen in our county in a quarter of a century. And that came specifically through the activities of, what? Okay. So this was an important story for us to share, not only because it showed the inadequacies of our police department and racial profiling, but we're able to show how there was a possibility of change through the partnership with the attorney. And the thing I wanted to stress here is what on the title of that slide. It says changing the narrative of how defender offices are understood. And there's a background and a context of this that sometimes I think gets lost on the battlefields of court for defender offices. In that we've been traveling around the world, Gene and I, not world, that too. We're doing social biography trainings in Russia next month. But we always hear that defenders often have the best stories. You know, they have these amazing heroic stories where people's lives are saved. But the problem is no one hears them. The public never hears them. The community or the clients don't hear them. And you may swap stories at the bar after work, but look, you're the only one talking to each other. So what we found we needed to do is we needed to expand or help share those stories for strategic reasons, not just so that you guys get pats on the back. Because what happens in the absence of you all sharing those stories is the public imagination, the story of public safety is ceded to the district attorney's office. It's ceded to law enforcement. And then your story is told through the lens, basically, of district attorneys. And so if we could challenge that, we could echo chamber the value of partnering with the public defender's office. And so what we did was, we started to help share that story. And we had this party of time saved. And we're able to have people that are represented by the public defender's office talk not necessarily just as public defenders as a useful kind of tool that you could get a fair outcome, but rather that there's an opening to partner with them on behalf of your loved one, that there could be an engagement. And what this means practically is, look, I told you we're organizers, which means we're used to campaigns. And so we did sort of a multi-pronged approach. We knew that here was the problem. People don't understand the value of the defender's office. We need to challenge that in the media. We need to challenge it on a personal narrative. So what we did is we started a documentary series. And when we've been going to these other places, we've been capturing these stories of what's the impact of the defender and the client and their loved ones on the outcome of a case. And then we also made a photo print that was of Gene's photos. I'm going to show you in a second because I'll sound like a crazy person when I describe it, but you'll see what I mean. And we also had this party, this gathering. And we're doing this in other parts of the country, not necessarily to do PR for the public defender's office, but just to get some of the truth out there so that the public imagination isn't misinformed by this false narrative of who defender offices are. And if I could sort of put this in a maybe more of a crass background, is there's really two things that we see happen to families and communities when a loved one is arrested and facing court. They either freeze up and feel they need to back off because if you don't have a law degree, you have no place, which we're saying is the exact opposite of what you need to do. And intrinsically, most people do. In other areas of public life, you have to engage to make change. But the other thing that happens is they then may see themselves, rightfully so, in this heroic parable, biblical proportions, where they see themselves as David versus Goliath. And that's an apt comparison. The problem is, in those situations, because there has not been a true narrative of the value of defender offices, they themselves are David, but the public defender is Goliath. Not the system, not mass incarceration, not even the prosecutor that's actually actively trying to put your loved one behind bars. Because you're the only one accessible and within earshot of who they are. So when their loved one gets arrested and they're trying to call and they say, nothing's moving, or how come he's facing so much time, you bear the brunt of the responsibility because they don't know the mechanics of the court or what you're doing. What we need to shift, and what participatory defense is attempting to do, is still telling a family, you are in a David-Goliath battle, and you are still David. But the Goliath is the criminal justice system that has been manipulative, that is stacked against you, that has all the resources and has these tools like prosecutors, like mandatory sentences, like racially profiled arrests. That is your Goliath. And the defender has a role, and they're still in this equation. But the defender is the rock of David. The defender is the weapon of justice that David must utilize in order to win their biblical battle. So when we're able to do that, we get time saved. So the next thing I want to show you is just sort of what we're doing in other communities. And if you're looking at the slide, who you're seeing is Gail Noble. And Gail Noble is a brilliant example of what this process does in transforming the sense of agency of somebody. Where the criminal justice system is making people feel small, making people feel powerless. And that's what happens, even if they're not the one facing charges. But that they could be transformed into arguably the most powerful agent of change in the court process. And so this is Gail in Birmingham, Alabama. Gail first came to us about 7 years ago when her son was arrested. And she didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to have an impact. And through the participatory defense approach of her engaging with other families, of her finding a way to apply some community pressure on the courts, she was able to get some measure of justice for her son. And what she did after that is also a keen example of what happens with families, is after they engage in a case on behalf of their loved ones, they still come to the meetings because they still want to help out other families who are going through the same process. And what Gail is doing right there in Birmingham, Alabama, is telling a room full of lawyers, of social workers, of community organizing, of the one ceremony we have at Debug. And I told you that our meeting is sort of stripped down. We're in a room like this, and we have a whiteboard, and we write people's names on the board of who we're here for. And for some of those families, they've been writing that name on that board for even years. And we go through each name and go through each strategy, and we say, come back next week until we win. And that allows them to live the rest of their lives during the week. We say, look, you should still feel okay to sleep. You should still be able to eat. You should still be able to care for your other loved one. Because know that once a week you're going to have a support group where you could share emotion, a shoulder to cry on, and also people to go to war with and go to court with you and have an impact and share the burden collectively. But the one ceremony we have is when someone comes home, when someone has beaten a charge, gotten a reduced sentence, and oftentimes that person has been detained through the whole process. And it's a name we only know through anecdote and stories from some other loved one. And we've seen their name every week after week after week. That person comes to our meeting. And when their name comes up, they come up and erase their name from the board. And it is a powerful moment because it means that the person is free, that the engagement has had impact, and all that work has paid off, if only by court attendance and paperwork and partnering with the attorney. And for the other families in the room, they get to see that they too can potentially have a finish line, that they too can maybe have their loved one erase their name. And so now Gail is traveling the country telling people about her as a mother was able to have impact. And if anyone could carry the message, it's someone who's walked down that road by themselves. Jean and I often say a phrase that an Indian philosopher, Krishnamurti, once said. He said, you can't get wet talking about water. And what that means is experience sometimes is the best school. And so to have other families who have experienced the court system, experienced working with public defenders, tell other families, regardless of where in America they are, they're trusted voices. And so what our trainings usually consist of when we've gone to these different places is we do a 2-hour training that gives the nuts and bolts of how to engage. But then we also go to court, have a defender kind of translate what's happening at court. And then we have a brainstorming session with that defender's office and community stakeholders. What we're doing is then using this time-saved concept as a way to publicize the message in that community, where we'll make this video, then we'll have a forum with the civil rights community, with the client community, show the video, and have this discussion of how groups can collaborate, and also have this party. I was going to show a couple of things, but I could take a question while I...
Question.
Sure.
It's up to you.
How are the years... so there's a question from a mitigation specialist that said, how were the years and years saved party calculated? And, you know, it wasn't terribly scientific. What we did is when someone came to our meetings, regardless of where they were in the life of the case. So some people came to us after arrest, some people came to us after an initial deal was offered, but before trial, etc. We looked at what they were facing, and for some people that was the best offer at the time. So someone was maybe facing, maybe someone was facing 20 years, and the offer on the table was 10 years. But after some work, they ended up getting 1 year. We would say that was 9 years of time saved. And so we totaled the numbers. And that's how we did that. Let me show you a couple other quick things. And then if there's more questions, we'd love to just talk about that. I don't know how we are on time. What does that mean? It's 12:45. Okay. So I want to show you this, and you could look at this, and you don't have to read the language. That's not the most important part. So this is a criminal felony procedure from Jefferson County in Birmingham. And this is commonplace to district attorney websites all over the country, where they give you a flow chart to what happens in a criminal court procedure. And the reason why we use this, this is a specific thing we use in our trainings with community organizations, is we say, look, the court system is gonna put the person that you care about through this machinery. It's gonna start at this top box of arraignment, what have you. It's gonna get funneled through, and then what most people do is they wait for people to get processed like on a conveyor belt through this machinery, maybe cross their fingers, maybe send a few prayers, and then they say, we'll see you at the end of this process. We'll see you at sentencing. That is typically what the response is from communities that are impacted by a potential incarceration. And what we're saying, though, is this. Now, the attorneys may be doing their work in these boxes. This is where they go to battle for the person that you care about. This is where they're making arguments. This is where they're going to trial and going through preliminary hearings and trying to mount defenses. But the most important part for families is the arrows. The space in between the boxes is where family and community participation could have direct impact on the outcome of a case, on whether it proceeds forward or even how the trajectory may be changed. And so, for example, in between, like so for Birmingham, what we show is after arrest and before a preliminary hearing. You don't just have to wait for the next court date and show up at court. Or just, what you could do is these very specific activities. Document the incident, get a list of witnesses, prepare mitigation information, could even be used for a bail hearing, do a meeting with your attorney, show up at court, take notes, get copies of discovery if it's available. This is, for example, after prelim. So prelim happens, and so you show up at court and you give your own pair of eyes, and then you also have a presence and you read the court transcripts so that you could understand what's happening. Now, the point isn't these specific activities. The point is that there actually are things to do in the arrows. The point is that people could do things in between the kind of crevices of this machinery that will change the outcome of a case. And so these are the kind of things that we go through in communities. We will show them specific things that we've done at different stages of a case, and that goes all the way from after arrest to the sentencing. But in communities, what we do is also meet with the public defender's office to say, what would you put in those gray circles? If you had the ideal relationship with client families and communities, what would you want them to do at these specific times? Because I'll tell you, there are people that are waiting with their toes dipping in the pool, ready to dive in, if they're only given an invitation to do so. So one of the last things I want to show you before we get into the social biography stuff and see if there's other questions and that sort of thing. Well, this is an example right here of a social biography packet. And we give these trainings to the community organizations. And so what we do know about social biography packets is we sort of know what they're not, even more than what they are. And they're not just a couple letters with a rubber band on it that you give to the lawyer right before they walk into court. But it has to be something that's very mindfully put together so it could be effective. And so we do these trainings where and you can look at this more specifically, but it's a question of who are you trying to target, and then what is the narrative that you're trying to tell? Who could carry that message? What are the types of challenges you need to offset through the mitigation packet? And I could tell you the impact has been so powerful. When we started doing these, we did them really on our own to sort of let the attorney know who they're advocating for at at a more fuller level than just a case file. But after we started doing them, and defense attorneys would use them to reduce felonies, to reduce sentences, to take we're in California, so they would take strikes off of sentencing. People have literally beaten what would have been life sentences as a direct result of these packets made from families. The public defender offices started asking us, can we send a loved one or our client your way? Can you help them make this? And so now they're being done all over. And so this is an example. You can look at this on your own time. But what our packets tend to look like is they have cover letters. They have a table of contents. They're organized based on kind of school of thought of which argument needs to be pushed or who could tell it. So in Xavier's point, a young man that we had cut a sentence in over half from, really by collecting the social biography information. We broke it down into letters from family, letters from his faith community, employers and future prospects, educators, and then photos. So that way the attorney could argue, look, he's more than just this case file. And also that there's all these other people in his life that are committed to his well-being that the courts could rely on at the end of making a decision.
Raj, we have a question from a public defender in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Cool.
She says, you've made a compelling case for the value of the participatory defense approach. That approach does, of course, require resources and support that many of us don't currently have. What suggestions do you have that can be implemented as a stopgap measure while we push for the long-term goal of participatory defense?
Great question. And I would argue, not just to be provocative, but this is what I believe in. Participatory defense could happen in any community in this country because the ingredients to make it are inherent to any community where people are needing public defender representation. So where you see it is just a shift of perspective. And so what that means is, here are a couple guiding questions to help locate that. And we've had to explore this in different communities. Think about who your clients are. Then think about who they go to in a moment of crisis. Not necessarily just criminal justice crises, but any sort of crisis. Who are the lifelines, the touchstones that they go to for support or for solace? That is the army that could be enlisted to be partners with the defender office to start participatory defense. What that means in a practical matter is, and this is by necessity, the notion that mass incarceration could be stopped or challenged by this small sliver of criminal justice reform organizations is completely irrational. But if you expand that spectrum to engage a number of other community members that never saw themselves as part of this fight, then you could kind of build up the coherent kind of counterforce to what's happening in local courts. So think of who your clients are. Think of who they talk to or who's in their kind of lives that they talk to in moments of crisis. So that could be the local church. It could be the community organization on the corner. It could be the neighborhood association. It could be just the elder on the corner that people go to every week when they just want to talk about what's going on with them. Those folks could be the infrastructure. And eventually what will happen, as you saw when I talked about Gail, is the public defender clients themselves who go to engage or start the process, they then become the organizers that could keep it going. So, the great irony of mass incarceration is that the more people it affects, the larger the number of people that could potentially be its problem solvers. They just haven't been given license to engage. And by seeing themselves as actors in this process rather than bystanders or victims, we think it could happen anywhere. So succinctly, without the rhetoric, what I would say to that public defender that raised a very good question is resources The resources that are needed to do this is plentiful. This isn't something where you need a lot of money. We did this totally without any sort of grant funding or anything for most of the duration we did this. Is there people that you've represented that seem like they've been chomping at the bit to get involved? Well, we have a toolkit that will show them how to be effective in that sort of instinct. Yeah, mothers, family members, church pastors. So in Nashville, we met a church pastor that we know is going to lead it. In Alabama, there's some social workers, some connected to the public defender's office and some not. In Philadelphia, there's an immigrant rights group. So it could take many faces, and they're there, and I can help you identify it if you want to follow it with me. Okay, should I show this? So this is the part of the presentation where I told you I was going to look like a crazy person. So let me make this on full. So I told you earlier that we have sort of this almost public education campaign that we're taking to different communities called Time Saved. And it's a way to change the atmosphere of how the public understands their local public defender, and to counter the narrative that they've been told on the street or by the cousin or by the district attorney's office. And so we go in, we'll make a video at the choice of the public defender. We'll pick this story that they wish the public knew better, make this documentary, and then we do a photo installation. And then we have a forum where we talk about what are some possible points of collaboration. So this is a bus stop size image. And it's called a lenticular print. And what you'll see is actually two images. So what you're initially looking at is it says time served. And it says 18 years, and there's a QR code to the mini documentary on this woman, Lisa Coulter. There's also a line that says when families and public defenders work together. So you're watching this thing, and we have this actually at the lobby at the public defender's office in Santa Clara County. And so you're looking at this, and it says time served, and she looks incarcerated and sad and alone. And you think, this is the reality. This is what it means to be represented by the public defender. This is what it means to be facing charges. But we needed to show how dynamic reality could be, that it's not only static and set in stone as soon as you get arrested. So the lenticular print will shift based on perspective. So it says time served, it says 18 years, and then it shifts to time saved, life. And so let me run that back, because some of you might have blinked when I did it. So it says time served, right? And so it says 18 years, because at this time, Lisa Coulter had done 18 years. Never thought she'd see her family again. But there was an opening because of California legislation where she was potentially open for release through Proposition 36. The problem was the district attorney's office was digging in their heels to challenge her release. Lisa had a great public defender, Megan Piano, who fought tooth and nail for her. But she needed more. As you all know, whether you win or lose isn't necessarily about how good of a technician you are in court. There's just a bigger context. There's a bigger fight. And so we enlisted the support of a local community leader to work with Lisa on a reentry plan, to work with Megan about how to communicate what she's coming out to. We brought her daughter into the picture. Her daughter had not seen her since she'd been arrested. She had grandkids that she never even met before. And we made it not just about Lisa. We said the well-being of this community is about making sure this grandmother comes home and this injustice is corrected. And so we see time served as a result of all that advocacy, and that's what the video shows. Then turn to time saved. And so you'll see it says time served became time saved. 18 years became life. And the rest of the phrase of that tagline appears where it says, when families and public defenders work together, loved ones come home. It's the rest of the line. And we have this for very tactical reasons, placed as the first thing you see when you walk into the Santa Clara County Public Defender's Office. Because we know what the story is that is rattling around in their head as they walk in. They're walking in saying, man, I wish I had an attorney I could pay for. I got to go with this free service. Anything free can't be good. They're sitting down. They're worried about whether they're going to have an attorney that's going to fight for them. And they're thinking, there's nothing I could do about this. And then they're sitting there seeing 18 years of incarceration become a lifetime of freedom because of the engagement with the attorney. And who you'll see here next to Lisa is her daughter and the granddaughter that she can now help raise that otherwise she would have only had to know through postcards. This is the power of not necessarily our organization. What we're saying is this is the magic that could happen if the community engages with the defender, if the defender is open to it, and that the more people know this story, the bigger the change that can happen. This was sort of the background I wanted to give. We're going to transition into a specific part of participatory defense, something we call social biography videos. And as I run into this, is this a good time to answer any questions on the mechanics of participatory defense? Okay. We're good? Okay. So let me take a swig of water. I don't know how you guys do this in court. Talking a lot makes me thirsty. Okay. So let me introduce you to my colleague. Oh, yeah, right? Okay. We're going to do a little activity here. So let me introduce it to you. I'm going to show you, I'm going to introduce you to Colette, who is an attorney that is going to display what happens at a sentencing hearing traditionally. And then we're going to show you the alternative in our little interactive part of the presentation.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Colette Tevet on behalf of Bryce Robinson. Your Honor, we're here today for sentencing of Mr. Robinson on one count of armed robbery. And we're going to ask the court to consider something extraordinary. We have supplied the court with a sentencing memorandum. We gave that to the court clerk last week, along with supporting letters from friends, family, community members. That was attached as Exhibit A. We also have included a psychosocial assessment which detailed Mr. Robinson's history of addiction and our proposed treatment program in which we're asking the court to place Mr. Robinson on probation. I hope that court has had the ample opportunity to review the memorandum, the letter, and the psychosocial assessment forms. Have you, Your Honor? Thank you, Your Honor. So, Your Honor, we are asking for a sentence of 2 years probation with the condition of treatment as one of the other conditions of this sentence. Mr. Robinson grew up in San Francisco. He was born to a family where his parents were very poor. They didn't have the means to support a family. And over time, Mr. Robinson dropped out of school. He got involved in drugs, and he got involved in the criminal justice system, and the court has had the opportunity to review his NCIC and to see the history that Mr. Robinson has in the criminal justice system. He got involved not only in the criminal justice system, spending time in and out of court, in and out of jail, but he became addicted to methamphetamine. But several years ago, he made the big change to move to Cloverdale. And it was when he moved to Cloverdale that he met his wife, Misty Robinson. Misty, can you please stand up for the court? And Misty Robinson changed his life in so many profound ways. She gave him the support he so desperately needed. They had a child, TT, 5 years ago, Your Honor. And when TT was born, that changed Mr. Robinson's life in so many profound ways. There was a discussion between Misty and Bryce that he would be a stay-at-home dad, and he took full-time care of TT. And in the last 5 years, every single one, and you saw that from the letters that have been supplied to the court, Bryce is seen all over town. He goes from playground to playground. All of the store owners know Bryce, and they'll wave to him, "Hey, Bryce, hey, TT," as he's walking through the streets with his beautiful son. And he loved his son, he loved staying home, and he was one of the staples in the community. But then something happened, Your Honor, and as the letter from the psychosocial assessment says, that relapse happens. And when he went home to visit his mother, he relapsed. And it was during that time of relapse that he made the unfortunate decision to get back involved in the criminal justice system. He got caught with another charge of armed robbery. But the minute that he relapsed, he got caught back in the criminal justice system, it's something that actually changed his life. As you can see, Your Honor, he has a powerful support system in the community. His wife is here if the court has any questions. We're asking the court to sentence Mr. Robinson to 2 years probation with all of the treatment plan to be followed. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Colette. So that should have felt familiar to you. I'm sure a lot of you have had to make a similar argument, stood in the same shoes that Colette was in. Now we're going to show you sort of the alternative, or maybe what we're hoping is sort of the 2.0 of those sentencing hearing and presentations. This is the social biography video that was made for Bryce Robinson. We did this in about 4 days total, from top to bottom, from meeting him to editing, and it was shown at his sentencing hearing at court.
My name is Misty Robinson. I live in Cloverdale, California, and 6 years married for 5. Child. His name is Tavian. I work as a social service director at a healthcare center.
My name is Lance. Last name is Huey. I'm the senior pastor at Westside Community Church here in Healdsburg. My relationship with Bryce has been pretty much as a pastor.
My name is Julie Glosser. I live here in Cloverdale. I am Bryce's sister, Misty's sister. We go to church together. Misty and I actually work together too. I live literally 2 doors down from Misty and Bryce.
My name is James Brown. I live here in Cloverdale, California. Personal friends. And I run a men's ministry at church that Bryce is a part of.
Well, when I met him, he was in a drug treatment program. He was a couple months off graduating, and we had started dating, and he had come out here and he would visit with me here in Cloverdale, and we would talk more. He would tell me about how he wanted to change his life, how he wanted things to be different, and so he made that decision to come out here, and I kind of like let him know up front like what I kind of expected, the kind of life I live, and you know, that I would want to live with a family. Well, when Tavian was born, it was huge for Bryce because Bryce is a fantastic father. Tavian is his first thought in almost everything he does.
I was just kidding, Tay-Tay. I mean, that's Tay-Tay means
We decided that he would be a stay-at-home dad just because it was more convenient for us financially. His first priority every day was always Tavian, so we'd get up and get him dressed, make sure he brushes his teeth, fix him breakfast, and then just spend the day with him. Home with him all day. We have this routine. There's probably about 5 parks in Cloverdale, so we try and hit each one every day. And he doesn't drive, so they have to walk around parks and do that. So it's easy for them to do that every day.
Cloverdale is approximately 8,000 people strong. It's a small town feel. I mean, the motto for the town is where the vineyards meet the redwoods.
San Francisco is where he came from. He adapted very well here, and I think that's mainly because of his personality. He's able to talk to people. It's more ways and ways than I do. I'm different to him. He has a very strong support system. He has people that love him for who he is, who know his struggles, and who are willing to help him with those struggles. I think some of the major aspects or contributions to his already here is the family support. I mean, I have a big family. I have lots of friends, and they kind of took him in, with things, and he had that support. Lots of support from our church.
the greatest, stay focused and true to himself, true to what he ultimately wants, and that is to be a good father, to be a good husband.
He was 100% committed to being dad every day. I mean, just he was there, and that's all Tavia knew. Bryce being gone, the impact is huge. I see Tavia missing his dad. When somebody is disconnected from somebody for that long, there's so much pain that is involved. There's so much hurt that doesn't go away. It doesn't go away. So, I know Misty's pain because, I mean, raising a family, having a kid, a child that wants their dad around and not knowing how to fix that for them is so painful. So painful. It was like waiting for David to start school so we could go to school and be there with him and help with his homework. I know that pain from my own kids, and I see it in his eyes. It shows a lot. He tries to be strong with his mommy, but it shows. It hurts. Misty, even though her support is strong also, she's alone. She's basically by herself in many ways. It hurts not having somebody around. It hurts not having somebody to talk to every night. Somebody to share the burdens with all the time. So even though we try, we're not Bryce. That's the man she chose to be with forever. He's very apologetic. He very much, it's something he wants to ever do again. He's learned something from his whole experience, what life could be like because
I believe if Brett had given a chance to go back, that he would be a model citizen based on, I believe right now, he feels the sting of your wife to talk to you at night. And if he feels the sting of a son, missing a son, because the bond and connection they had was extremely strong.
I've had some personal dealings with him, and I've just watched him break in my heart as I was telling him. It's just because he does want the success of his son. He does want to be a good husband. He does want to be a good father. And I think it's important to pursue young families. I think it's part of our ultimate vision is to take places in life together.
there is so much that he can reach for to get help that I don't think that it's possible for him to slip in.
This piece of his life is that you know that's it.
I Octavian knows where his dad is at, but he knows that he's in jail, that, his dad's in something, he's on a timeout. So, it's time for me.
Pop that up. So that was the same story. You essentially just heard two stories articulated through different mediums. One was from a very compelling and articulate attorney, and the other version was you being a sort of fly on the wall, listening directly from central characters in Bryce's life. Sorry.
We are about to go.
That's a sneak peek of that's for the after party. So let me go back to this. So Bryce's video was, like I said, made in 4 days, and was played at his sentencing hearing. Now, he was facing 15 years because of the charges and because of the enhancements. And everyone was pretty convinced he was going to get the 15 based on the indication from the probation report. We produced this video in collaboration with the attorney, meaning we asked her to tell us the story that she thought would be effective, and then we went out and did it. The attorney, the public defender in San Francisco, played the video in court on a big screen, and I could tell you, I couldn't tell whether I was at church or I was at court, because I wasn't sure I was used to seeing so many people emotional and crying as I did in those pews. Bryce was sitting feet within the screen and was actually visibly shaking, because as with anyone, we rarely ever get to see the story of our lives by the people we love and who love us. Really, the only time that happens is at eulogies, and we tend not to be at those if we're the person that's being talked about. So the result of that video was, despite the arguments from the district attorney's office, is the judge went with the mitigated sentence and took out some enhancements. So he ended up sentencing Bryce to around the 5-year mark. Now, it certainly was not the total win we are looking for. As you all know, wins are gray and relative in your field. We took it as meaning he's going to be home when Tay-Tay's still a little boy. And that far and above was the most important thing. So we wanted to do that little exercise to show you the sort of difference that could be done by using the medium of video. Let me introduce you to the person holding the camera that day when we're at Tay-Tay's house. This is Gene Melisang.
Hey everybody, my name is Gene, and I work a lot on the social bio videos. Yeah, so when we're going through the process of social bio videos, we'll meet with the public defender, and usually they'll have character bio themes, and this is part of your argument. And you know the court system that you're working with best more than we do. So you know the judges, you know the prosecutor that you're up against, and so usually if you can see on the screen, there's a story construction when we meet with the public defender. So the public defender will give us a theme, and for Bryce's theme, he was a father that moved to, that took care of his son, moved to a small town, and changed his life from the city life of addiction to moving to the small town, being a great father, and starting to go to church. And so with those themes, we'll get characters, and the characters in Bryce's video, it was his wife, the sister-in-law, folks that knew him best. Because what we're doing is we're taking the judge and the prosecutor home. That's what it's doing. And when they walk out of the door, you're just like, how could you lock this guy up? And so the subjects carry the theme. And so we'll get questions that we'll ask questions to the characters that speak to these themes. And let me read this real quick.
Right, and just
and for the visual part too. I don't know if you know this, but a lot of the I'm a very visual person, so when you're watching something, you got to add some special background, some special B-roll. And so when you see the pastor, we shot him in his church. You can see the cross obviously in the background. We got shots of the kids playing next to the vineyards, so you can see that it is a small town that there's kids playing. And it's just a visual way to take your argument and bring the judge into that atmosphere, or that prosecutor into that atmosphere.
Right. So as you'll see on the screen, the way we produce social biography videos is probably the same way you construct narratives for sentencing reports. And so we have, like Gene was saying, the themes. What is that really needs to be communicated? What are the questions that allow the particular characters you've chosen to carry that specific theme. So they're speaking from their particular authority. So the church pastor is talking about his story of redemption or how the church is going to be there. And then the mother is talking about the collateral consequences on the child. And as Jean showed, what you could do in video that you just can't do even if you're a really prolific writer is you could give context and background in a way that is sort of unprecedented. And so what we say between these themes, and we give trainings to public defender offices on how to do these, is this flow works sort of like Christmas tree lights, where you could test the integrity of it once you plug it in. And if one is off, kind of like if you take one light out of the Christmas tree light, the whole thing goes off. So let me give a quick little background on how this process started for us. This is Jean actually working on this was a life case. That's actually Lisa wiping a tear from her eye. And so we started making social biography packets, as I told you about. But then what we found was there needed to be another way to communicate what we thought was important. As Colette was saying, what we often heard in parking lots after sentencing hearings wasn't, I wish this never happened, or I wish the prosecutor didn't overcharge him. What they often say is, I wish they knew him like I knew him. That was really what families wanted to do, and so we needed a mechanism, an instrument to do that. And where we started mixing media is we had a guy in East Palo Alto who was facing 5 years, and it was a low-level drug charge, but because of enhancements and priors, it became 5 years. He said, look, I could do the time, but if I go in, they're going to take my 2 little girls. And he's a single father. And we knew him as a father because he came every week and brought his girls. So we gave him a camera and said, just take us through a day of what it's like being a dad. And so he did that, waking the girls up, making them breakfast, taking them to volleyball practice, reading them at bedtime. And he showed that as a photo album, as a photo essay to probation, and then used it at the sentencing hearing. And the judge, the public defender at the time said, look, the least you're going to get is 3 years. But with that photo album and photo essay, the judge was able to see this Carnell in a different light, not just his case file, and also see the consequences of his incarceration. Ended up giving Carnell a 6-month outpatient program instead of a 5-year stint. So we used to make these sort of victory videos after we won a case. And we said, well, if photo went well, what if we just did videos during it? So we started doing that. So Jean gave you sort of the mechanics. This is Jean working on a case that we'll at least tell you about, where her little brother was facing significant prison time, and we needed to show that there was someone in his life that the court could trust. And so we're interviewing her. And just to give some sort of context as we sort of move on, you heard Colette give an eloquent presentation on a webinar to who knows how many people, right? And she did it coolly and calmly and professionally. But the reality is, when people are asked to present at court and they're not a seasoned attorney, it is nerve-wracking. And not only on top of that, so you have to present, and imagine what you're asking of people when you say, show up at court and testify for your loved one. They're saying, one, go up to a room that only knows you as someone connected to the person they're trying to put away. There's bailiffs with guns. There's a judge in a robe, probably sitting 8 feet higher than you are. There's a microphone that you're not used to ever using. And then they say on top of that, now we want you to give 2 minutes, 3 minutes, the most important speech you'll ever give in your entire life, and the well-being and future of your loved one depends completely on you. Go. Now, how many of us could rise to that occasion?
This is nerve-wracking.
This is nerve-wracking, I'm saying. So what happens is people kind of fumble around, they try, or maybe they're used to writing, but maybe they're not used to writing. And so you take the impact of that versus Bryce's wife at home, sitting in their child's bedroom, looking at her child, responding to key questions that allows her to communicate what's profoundly deep in her heart. What she's allowed to do is much more than what she'd be allowed to do if she just was talking in front of a judge.
Yeah, one of the things as I'm listening to you and watching these social videos is that just what you said. Number one, many judges won't let children into the courtroom. And I can tell you, based upon what you said, it doesn't always work out the way we want it to work out.
Right.
And having the opportunity for them to replay that video, as a lawyer, if I say, Your Honor, my client is very involved in his church. Judges have heard them find, our clients have found God.
Right.
And it doesn't, it's almost, it's counterintuitive. When you see this video and you hear from the pastor, it's so impactful. And my question, I guess, to you is the production of something like that, the 7 minutes, is that very expensive, or how can we as public defenders create something like that, Gene, on a shoestring budget?
You could easily do one of these on your phone, on your iPad. It's not that hard. Yeah, so it's pretty accessible to anyone. They have programs, video editing programs on your iPad that you could use. iPhones are really good qualities. Some of your phones probably have better quality than these handy cams that they sell in the stores. So yeah, anybody could do this. I think it's all mostly about the questions you ask. This is where you're gonna take off your public defender jacket and not be you're not gonna be formal, because you're just gonna get formal answers. So one of the questions that we asked his father, who was very formal, he's a very formal guy on camera, he looked formal too. One of the questions that Raj asked was, tell us about the moment that you got the phone call from your son Tyler. And that question totally threw him off because it triggered him. He totally went into this. He paused, because the whole time he was like, yeah, so great on camera. And then he paused, and then he lost his breath on camera, and he started crying. He's like, I never wanted to ever feel that moment. I don't want no parent to ever feel that moment ever again. And that's just these are leading questions that help this guy, this kid, to see that he has a great father, and to see he has a family that cares about him so much. And you can't do that in a formal setting. So yeah.
Yeah, and just to say too, that response is look, you may not have a world-class photo videographer sitting next to you at work, but here, quick test in any public defender's office that you have. Ask the entire office, not just the lawyers, the social workers, the investigators, admin staff, whoever, how many of you have produced a video? And people are going to raise their hand now in 2015, where 10 years ago they wouldn't have. Now, they may not have made a social biography video, but they may have made a video about their kid's soccer game. And so what that does is it shows how easy they've made video production to be, where you don't need a video production team, you don't need fancy equipment. The sort of democratizing of video has hit every other arena of life except for the courts, because people know it's an effective way to communicate. So you couple that with people that know how to weave a story in court, and then you can produce things that have tremendous impact. And Gene, maybe you could run through just a couple quick. I could move this along while you go.
So the slide that Raj showed you where I was filming the sister with her baby. His name was
Bryce.
Ruben.
Oh, Ruben. Yeah.
And this kid, he was always moving everywhere. He was a kid that never had stability ever in his life. And so there was let me see. Sorry about that. There was a map that we showed in California of how many times he moved. And it was just a moving map, up and down, up and down. And you just get this sense of he was unstable, his whole life. And he was 17, by the age he moved 13 times. And so he was homeless. His mom was homeless. I think his whole family was homeless. And he would sleep, just to spend time with his mom, he would sleep in this lot with her. And so we took a photo of the lot, and this is the lot, just to see just to see what it looked like, to show the judge where it looked like where he slept, because you could say someone's homeless, but when you see where they slept at, it's a whole different thing.
You want to change it?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
And so these are some of the examples that we use.
Sure, you don't have to go through all of them.
Okay.
Whatever you feel like. Do you want me to just go to each one, or?
We go to Vincent. So in Vincent's case, we showed the community when the crime happened, and it was pretty heavy in gangs, and this was the rise of gangs in St. Louis. And so we went over there and we asked people about the 90s and what was happening, and they said that you won't find another 20 to 35-year-old black men in that community because that generation is gone. And so we found like 4 or 5 of them. And this guy, Bone, he talks about that. And we showed how many times he got shot. He must have got shot like 7 times. And he's just showing us everywhere. And his whole body, he's just, I got shot here, I got shot here. He's like, yeah, and that's normal. He says it very calmly. So, it wasn't traumatic for him. It was just, he was just happy to be alive. So, yeah.
And so this was interesting. Val Leftwich, a public defender in Missouri. So we're used to doing social biographies on the person facing charges and their loved ones. What she wanted to show was what she called environmental mitigation, which is, she said that the jury, the judges in St. Louis have no idea what it means to have grown up as a young black man in the small municipality neighboring Ferguson called Pine Lawn in the 1990s during the crack epidemic. And she said, we want to tell the community story of that period as a way to do it. And it turned out that we had embedded witnesses, so to speak, in these places, which are the people that live in the community.
And he's not just lifting up his stomach to show you his stomach. Those are actual scars from his bullet wounds that we took photos of. So,
one I wanted to show, because I think it shows even the potential of it, of things that could happen as technology advances. So this is actually an SB 260 case in California, which just means because of the changes in juvenile life without parole that happen nationally in California, there are people that are potentially open to relief that had been serving life terms. And so this gentleman is potentially one of those candidates for release. But he's been down for 18 years, and his family is scattered all over the place. And so this is a planning meeting. This is his public defender. This is the client's family that have come in to debug in different places. And this is his brother, who's actually Skyping in from Mexico City. And so we actually did an interview. We've done these twice, where the family wasn't local, and all we did was do a Skype recording and integrate into the editing process, so their voice and their face and their emotion was included into what the judge was hearing. So for those of you that say, oh, well, the family moved away, well, it's a different situation now, where that doesn't mean much. I mean, you're watching this on a webinar, so you know what I'm talking about. Okay. Do you want to go to the next slide? Or you want to talk about one of these?
Sure. And Xavier, if we could go to Xavier's slide. This was a case, Xavier, where we showed the theme of future prospects, where after he committed the crime, he went back to college, started going to church. And this is not just because he got arrested. This is because he's seen a point of his life where he needed to switch everything around. So he totally did a 360. And we talked to his college counselors who said, this kid, you can't lock him up because he's a smart kid. And we talked to his uncle who he worked for. We talked to the pastor of this church who led the student group. And so We just showed that he had a future for him, and he was going to be a great addition into the community. Yeah.
And so you'll see it took 30 years sentence to 5 years. This is a guy that had, I guess what lawyers call bad facts. So he had a string of robberies with use of a gun. With all the enhancements, it was way more than years he's spent on this earth that he was facing in prison. And we got it down to 5 years as a way of communicating the potential of this kid and also the people in his life. Let's see if I can rewind this back. So just to put it in span, I mean, so I don't know if we're showing the screen right now, but just tell you the kind of breadth of how and where you can use this. This was used in a juvenile case to stop it from going to adult court, so meaning pre-trial. Xavier was done in a plea negotiation. Willard right here is, whoa, my lord. Willard was a Prop 36 candidate who's now home with his daughter rather than spending life in prison. This case, he was facing immigration deportation if the case stayed at the felony level. The attorney was slamming her head in the wall, trying to communicate, look, the impact of this young man, 18 years old, who had never been arrested, facing a felony. The DA says, whatever, he'll do a little time, that's the most I could do. He would have been deported. And not only would he have been deported, his family would have collapsed because he was the main person bringing in income to keep rent. So this is for immigration relief. This case was SB 260. What we didn't tell you about Bohm, first of all, we met him at a car wash. So we just walked around the community until we found people to talk to. But this is a capital case. This is the gentleman we're doing the video for is facing execution in a state that is trying to do some sort of sprint to become the fastest execution producing state in the country. And so the person they're represented is facing the ultimate consequence. But there are people stepping up that are anxious to at least help tell the realities of his story. Should I move on to the next one?
Sure.
Okay. So we're hoping there's some questions too. So we're trying to blaze through some stuff.
Raj, we do have a question, but it's a question that's a little bit outside of your scope of expertise and maybe something that Colette might be able to address. And that question was, are the outtakes from these social biography videos discoverable material? So Colette, is that something that you would like to address?
I guess the first question I have for you, Raj, is that something that you, when you're asked to produce a social video, do you discuss some of those ramifications and what's discoverable with the public defender, as well as the folks that are going to be in the videos?
Yeah, so we hear that question come up a lot when we do these discussions. This is usually where we sort of step back and have the lawyers debate each other. What we've heard the other lawyers say is they consider this work product, attorney-client work product, and just the way you'd write notes, they say the outtakes of the video footage counts as that.
We recently spoke with a capital attorney in Texas who said that that has been a concern of hers. So they really plan this in advance. Before the video's turned on, they kind of understand where they want to go with the questions, and they're careful about. They said, that there's some time of thoughtfulness that goes into how these things are produced, and to ensure that if they have to turn this stuff over, that there's nothing that's harmful to their clients.
Right. Yeah. That sounds good. Okay. And just the other point we wanted to stress, I said, look, there's a lot of people that probably got iMovies of their kid's soccer game, that they're probably inundating your Facebook with. Those skills are translatable to something really effective like helping make these videos. I'm
sorry. We also have one question from a public defender agency saying that if they're going to start doing this process, would you be available if they had any questions about how some of the mechanics?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this actually coincides well with this slide. if we did this presentation, like I said, even 8 years ago, here's what we would tell public defenders' offices. We would say, okay, first of all, what you need to do to make social biography videos is dramatically increase your budget so that you could hire a flossy production team that specializes in video production. And you have to buy all this expensive equipment. It's not that day and age. We're convinced that this could be done in-house. And so what we've been doing is been training public defender offices on how to make them. And that includes the narrative, how to bring themes and distill them down to particular questions, how to get people to talk comfortably, but also how to do things like lighting, background images, how to edit in a timely manner. And it ranges. So we've done, the range is people could call us or email us and we'll talk them through it. When we were in St. Louis a couple weeks ago, there's an attorney from Kansas City that's doing trying to do one of these videos. She came and hung out with us for a couple hours, and we talked through the editing process, and she's good to go. So we could give sort of technical assistance, for lack of a better word, from afar, or we could come in and give a training. We give these sort of day-long trainings. The example I like to share is we've done some of these trainings with the young attorneys at Gideon's Promise, and they want to try some stuff. And so we had an attorney, a great attorney down in Atlanta, who called us up after a training and said, I'm going to do one tomorrow. How do I do it? I've never made a video. And she made a video, like Jean was saying, with her iPad, she and her husband went out that weekend, recorded. We talked her through questions to ask and that kind of thing. She took a 25-year sentence down to 3 years. 25 years down to 3 years. The point is, you don't have to make a video that's going to appear in Sundance. You just need to make a video that's effective. And that could certainly be done. So for example, our training, so this is what we trained in North Carolina, did a training in Alabama on the editing process. We did some trainings with the great team of federal attorneys in New York. And what our trainings is, we talk through the process in the first half, then we give them a test case. And they, based on the training, and break up into teams, they construct the story that they want to tell. We have a camera with each team and a laptop, and they have to film it. And so they take turns holding the mic, asking the questions, being the character. They edit, and then by the end of the day, believe it or not, they show each other the videos, and we see which team produced the best videos. We also get to see who the best actors are. So you could tell here they had someone crying. So that's that. Yeah.
We have one more question. What is the best way to show the judge this during sentencing? Do you need a PowerPoint projector, or is there other ways of doing it if your organization doesn't have that, or can you rent these from libraries, or how do you show this to the judge and the prosecutor?
So we've seen them presented in multiple ways. So probably the most common way is they get produced and then put on a DVD, copies for the prosecutor, copies for the judge, sometimes copies for the probation. Usually as a data file, so not as a DVD movie file, but something that'll play on any computer. That's the most common way. So they usually do that. Or they might have the judge. So in that case, they had a projector and they had equipment at court, and so they played it at court. Generally, the judges seeing these videos are seeing it before sentencing, I think, or so they could sort of think it through or sit in their chambers and watch it. In some cases, they've actually watched it just through YouTube. We had a panel of the Three Strikes panel that dealt with life cases. So if you had 3 strikes and you wanted to reduce it by having the DA pull one of the strike priors, they have this panel. And so what the attorney did is he presented his packet, all the expert, paperwork, then gave them a private YouTube link. And we uploaded the video on YouTube, and they watched it on YouTube. So those are all the kind of the ranges. Yeah? Okay, and here's some basic information for the for trainings and that kind of thing. We would say just try it, and they could be done. Like I said, we're doing these in matters of days now. You know, like 4 days from start to taping to final product. Generally, I think our position is this is going to be the future of mitigation. It's already the courts are already to some regard being digitized. And back home they're giving people that are in custody discovery on iPods. I know that's not all across the country, but it's the direction that's going to move. For us, we're not that enamored by the technology of it, but what we see is an opening where we could help, we meaning the larger collective we, could help shave this into something that allows a new pathway for family and community voice to have a tangible place and role in the decision making of a court process. That is a larger, more profound shift for us. And I think there's a very compelling rationale, and we get asked all the time, you're going to make a video for someone that has these charges, same kind of stuff you do, right? But all we're saying is, look, if you're going to be making a decision about somebody and their future and their fate, you should be as informed as possible. And you should have as many points of reference of information as possible so that you make an informed decision. All this is really doing is facilitating that process. And we would say in some ways in a more efficient way than a large looming stack of papers. That you could get a DA or a judge to sit for 6 minutes, 7 minutes, and know that they'll have focused attention because the video is engaging, versus a mountain of paperwork that you're not really sure if they read it or if they even, if their eyes are glossing over while they're reading it. So we think it's the next level.
I wanted to just ask a question. When you, looking at your photos and reflection from St. Louis and Ferguson, and your discussion about what you have observed during the time that you've gone cross-country sitting in courtrooms where many of these misdemeanor cases are being pled out without lawyers being present, or there's young public defenders that have very, very high workloads.
Yeah.
Do you think that something like this social video, could be used in places like Pine Lawn or Ferguson or in small courtrooms in other jurisdictions, and not just the big capital 3 strikes cases?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh,
go ahead.
St. Louis is a pretty complex place because of municipality. So, they don't even let the public into the courtroom. So, but yeah, I think that these videos could be used. We've done it before. So that's just testimony to, these could be used in any case.
And I think it may, in those municipalities fairly soon. We did, we were recording Latricia, who we wrote about in the piece, who's facing hefty fines and potential jail time. And typically examples, what was happening in Ferguson, their neighboring county, and the injustice the DOJ sort of accounted for, of people sort of being, again, their pockets shook, right? So we recorded Latricia because we're making a time-saved video for St. Louis and our city defenders to use. But they have an indigency hearing coming up for her, where they're going to argue why why she's indigent and what the impact is for the judge. We're going to give her that. We're going to give them this video to use. So there's going to be counties and courts where someone's going to have to be first, just the way it is in everything else. But the only way it changes is if someone tries it. And we've used them now in every possible sort of range of cases that we're in contact with. The biggest shift is, we know we're not the first people that tried video in court. But because of how expensive the process was, they were only being used for capital cases, clemency. What we're saying is, because of the accessibility of the technology and the speed of how you can produce these, they can be used in any type of case, but also anywhere in the lifespan of a case. So we've used them, almost immediately after arrest. They could be used for bail hearings. They could be used for early resolution calendars. You don't have to wait just for sentencing to use it. And we've used it in immigration court. First time in history we used it in a prosecutorial discretion case that we worked on with Stanford University, where it was going there.
What about in negotiation with the prosecutors, outside of the judge?
Yeah, that's actually where we probably used it in equivalent amount of judges.
Yeah, Xavier's case is the kid that you've seen who went to college, went to a church group. His was used in that part. Yeah.
Yeah, so that just the way a public defender has a meeting where they're going to do a presentation, and they're saying, "Come on, and read this, biographical information an expert did when they sat with them." They're saying, "Okay, look, here's the video," and it's part of their toolkit. So the best impact or outcomes we've seen, and there's a range of involvement the attorney has. We found that it works most effectively when the attorney is really quarterbacking everything, not just saying, "Make us a video," but really orchestrating stuff. Here's the key point that we need to stress. And we even show them the edits and say, "Take this part out, play me more of this." We had an attorney that said, I like this, but I don't want my client wearing shades because this prosecutor thinks anyone that wears shades is a gang member. Little subtle details where that knowledge...
Music. Like,
yeah, you want to tell me music?
Yeah,
please?
even with music, the judge and the prosecutor more. So if the judge doesn't like corny stuff, you're not gonna play some. You're not gonna have background music. Sometimes you'll just have people talking. So yeah.
So I think that's the range of our presentation. I did want to say at least one more thing, and then we certainly can entertain questions or do anything else if people are interested. Because I don't know if we sort of stressed it enough. I know there's a question that came in on email of how do we get started with participatory defense? And we certainly see social biographies as just a tactic of this larger thing of participatory defense. And just like we have trainings for public defender offices on social biography videos, we give these trainings on participatory defense, and I think I ran through the model. We would go to that community. We'll do a training for the attorneys. We just did one in Philadelphia 2 days ago. And then we'll meet with community organizations and then try to have a brainstorming sessions together. Not that every participatory defense activity or model would replicate what we're doing in San Jose or such. We're not trying to become McDonald's. What we're saying is it's not about replication. It's about building an instinct that already exists in your communities to get involved, taking off the veneer that public defenders are the enemy and making them the partner, maybe the most important person in your life at that moment, and that together you could change the entire culture of the criminal court system there. What we're doing in a practical matter, when we say we've been going around sort of spreading this message, is we're going to communities, particularly where there's some forward-thinking public defender's office that want to try doing more. And a lot of them are doing really interesting, revolutionary pieces of work. We think the timing of this is really just a response, in that you look at the great work being done in places like New York and other places of holistic defense. Major transformation of what public defense is. Community-oriented or client-centered defense. Major transformation, right? These sort of stretching the boundaries of what the expectation is. But for us, as non-lawyers, there is a hunger to say, how do we reciprocate that energy? What can communities do to meet you in the middle so that we collaboratively make this larger transformative change? And so we're going to places, and they're starting it in different ways. In Birmingham, they had their first meeting 2 weeks ago at their office that had a lot of social workers who were sort of the front line in that community. In Philadelphia, like I said, we're working with the immigrant community and the public defenders in that region. Montgomery County has an incredible public defender that wants to try new models. So it'll look different. The challenges will look different. The campaigns that people get working on to bolster public defender office services will look different, but you'll have the backup and support of the community when those activities or campaigns are tried. We want to bring people together at the end of the year. We want to say, try this, see what happens, and we want to bring people together, both public defenders and communities, to say, what have you learned, and how can we share, and what are maybe even common spaces of work that people want to work on. If I told you in San Jose, where we're from, years ago, that we're going to have a march that makes it so misdemeanor arraignment courts are staffed by public defenders, please come to my march. That would be a lonely march. People wouldn't come. But if I told you that, and I had a flyer that I passed around in the community, impacted communities, and I said, come to our march this weekend. We're going to be rallying and marching so that people of color, low-income communities, people who have been grinded up by the criminal justice system, that their constitutional rights too can be protected, that they too should get equal and fair representation, that they too have a possibility of justice. I would have a march. I would have the NAACP there. I would have that community church. I would have people that have been watching Eric Garner and Mike Brown on the news saying, how can I affect change in my community? What they didn't have is an invitation and the proximity to make change, which is just around the corner at their public defender's office, where we could attack and change the problems with the court system. This may sound like hyperbole, may sound over the top, but I'm convinced that if we're able to make this shift of looking at clients not as the objects of the criminal justice system, but as maybe arguably the most important key actors of change in the criminal justice system, we're going to make the largest historical shift in criminal justice reform since the Declaration of Gideon. And these folks in St. Louis, in Philadelphia, in Alabama, whoever else emailed in, these are going to be the founding mothers and fathers of a grand movement that our grandparents are going to have impact. Our grandchildren are going to have impact from. That's significant of a transformation, and we're excited to meet people that want to try it. I think that's all we had. Do we have anything else? That's sort of all we had.
Thank you so much, Raj and Jean. I can't tell you how informative this has been, and watching you and studying the work that you've been doing and the social videos, hearing about the work that you've been doing collaboratively with public defender systems, I do think that we can make some really strong, systemic, long-lasting changes between how our communities understand the criminal justice system. So, on behalf of NACDL, I want to thank both you and Jean so much for coming in. I'm sure you're going to be busy in the next many months, Russia and on. It's like to infinity and beyond. I want to thank and take a moment to say thank you to the support of our NACDL members, the Indigent Defense Committee, the Foundation from Criminal Justice, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and we're especially grateful for the Indigent Defense Training and Reform Grant from Koch Industries, which made today's program possible. So I want to thank you all, and if anyone has questions out there, you can continue to contact me, Diane. I really beseech you to go on to the Debug website and take a look at the social justice videos and some of the papers, photographs that you have produced in the last many years. So thank you all very much.